Thanks for being here. I'm Unresolved, or as most of you know me, Rashid. And in this live stream, I want to address a weird term I've encountered today. It's the first time I encountered this term, post-mortem privacy. Post-mortem is Latin for beyond death, and privacy comes from privatus, that means the right of a corporation or a cult to withhold information from the public. So we know that the living have this obsession with controlling who knows what about them. Sometimes it's understandable that you want to conceal something about yourself or about your past, rightfully so, but often people just want to control other people, how other people see them, how other people treat them. That's the real motivation behind this privacy hoax. Because privacy is something that is made up. It doesn't actually exist out there. Evil spirits can enter into any house, into any room, unless hindered by the Holy Spirit or by other demonic spirits. So the whole idea of privacy is just a big joke that human beings fall for. It does not exist. So when I got this term today, post-mortem privacy, I was thinking, what? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? So now they want to come up with the idea that you're entitled to control information about you from beyond the grave, while you can't be while you're not even active after you pass away. The reason I'm discussing this in this live stream is to show you how obsessed with death and destruction the world is. That is why I'm discussing this with you. Look, even the satanic governments of this world have common sense. When someone is alive, it's relevant for that individual to hide certain information about themselves because information can be used against them. But once the individual has passed away, they're gone from the earth. They're not active, they're not around. So whatever people found out about the individual can't harm nor benefit the individual anymore. It cannot. So the same it is with the right to vote. As long as you're alive and you're living in a country or you have the nationality of a country, you are entitled to vote. But if you pass away, how can you vote when you're not even around to know what's going on? So the dead cannot vote. The dead cannot participate in daily life. So the dead cannot be granted civil rights, no legal entitlements. Even the Italian governments of the world know this. Yet, they came up with this thing called post-mortem privacy. That shows you how obsessed communists are with control. They even want to control other people after they die. Because often those satanic governments come up with policies to appease the rage of the masses. That's why. And I'm telling you, this term post-mortem privacy proves it. World links, if it were possible, they would even be controlling beyond the grave. But that's not possible because the moment your physical body deactivates, you are dropped into Sheol, God's archive, where you will remain till Christ comes back and resurrects you in an immortal physical body. So, nobody is able to do anything beyond the grave. Anything you want to achieve, any impact you want to have, you do it now. Now, your impact may last beyond your lifetime. That's true. But it's your things that you've done during your lifetime that impact will last. Beyond the grave, you can't do anything anymore. Now, think about the following. The world is willing to protect the desires of those who passed away when it comes to property, houses, lands, or money. That's why you have something called a testament or a will. To whom do you leave your property after you pass away? Truth is, you were born with nothing and you will leave with nothing. And a lot of people forget about it. Now think about this for a moment. How come the living are so considerate of the dead that they're not so considerate about the fellow human beings who are alive, just like they are? The world has more honor and more love and more consideration for the dead than they have for the living. That is what I'm pointing out here. And that shows you how backwards the world really is. For example, there was this Dutch artist called, yes, I'm just going to call his name, André Hazes. He has a son with a similar name, and now his son is called André Hazes. But back then, the former André Hazes Senior, some people call him, he passed away for a while. The thing is, when this André was alive, people listened to his songs. He had performances here and there. The folk singer passed away, and suddenly there was a stadium filled with people giving homage to him. And later, this homage became a stepping stone for his son with a similar name to also start his career. Now, why didn't people give him flowers, give him compliments, and give him all that praise when he was still alive? Why did he have to die for people to realize how valuable he was? That's weird. I mean, he's gone. Since after the body deactivates, you're gone. So he's not even aware that people are bringing flowers to him. And the flowers you bring, you will throw them on the grave and the flowers will rot away because he's not there to benefit from the flowers. He will not smell the flowers, he will not feel the flowers, he will not touch the flowers. So all that money spent on him after he passed away is money wasted. There's nothing wrong with having a funeral. There's nothing wrong with having a tombstone or whatever. But to lavish someone after he passed away, that goes against natural sense, common sense, and against reality. Just like Ninja Viking is saying here, Vincent van Gogh was a Dutch artist also. When he was alive, he had no recognition. Little people knew about him, little people cared about him. After he passed away, the Dutch government made him into a national symbol for the arts. Let's go further. You had Rembrandt van Rijn, a painter. I believe it's from the colonial era. This man, he was not well beloved at all during his lifetime. He was forgotten. He was ignored. He was considered not important. When he passed away, now people realize, hey, this guy brought forth so many paintings. Hey, he was one of us. He was Dutch. So, hey, we can use what this man left to us to boost our Dutch image of our country. And suddenly, Rembrandt van Rijn became this famous Dutch painter. And listen, he is not even aware this happened. There are people making fortunes on his name. Now he passed away, while during his lifetime, he was struggling with money from time to time. And this is what I'm pointing out. The world does not love you when you are alive. Why? Because when you are alive, you are affected by how they treat you. And when you are affected by how they treat you, which is in a narcissistic way, you can call them out on it. You can confront them. And they can't handle this. But when you pass away, they can perform a ritual to make themselves appear good so they don't have to feel bad for how they neglected you while you were alive. And that is the world. That is the world. So that is why a lot of people are so sad on funerals. Now, some people are genuinely sad because they really miss the individual. That happens. But a lot of people, sometimes even close relatives, are only sad with them passing away because now they can't rectify the neglectful attitude they had towards the individual. Especially if the individual died due to suicide or due to a tragic accident or due to some type of sickness. People that had a loose mouth about the individual or had negative thoughts about them when they were alive, the guilt and the embarrassment creeps in and they want to get rid of it. So they want to be able to perform rituals to make them feel good about themselves so they don't have to face themselves. Thank you very much, Suzanne, for the super chat and super sticker. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. So that's why on funerals, only people who are invested in a good image are invited. So that's the purpose of a funeral. It's not for the one that passed away, because the one that passed away doesn't even know what's going on. They're not even in the body anymore. The body is decomposing. The funeral is for those that remain alive. They have to cope with the fact that the individual is not around anymore, and if there were unresolved conflicts, those unresolved conflicts can become generational curses. That's another thing a lot of people don't realize. Unresolved conflict can turn into a generational curse if one of the participants or one of the targets passes away without ever coming to a resolution. Whenever a conflict or whenever resentment is not resolved, it will become a generational affliction. So one way to mitigate, is that how you say it? I wanted to mitigate those generational afflictions is by closing the chapter of someone's earthly existence with a beautiful funeral. And everyone agrees we will only remember this individual as this great guy. We will minimize his faults, we will minimize his errors, and we'll only look at them in the best positive light. And by doing that, we can forget about neglect that happened to the individual. Because as long as the facts are there, that this individual was victimized by the crowd, that the crowd has to deal with the embarrassment of how they neglect this individual. So that's why we all will look at an individual in the best positive light so that we can all avoid the consequences of the past. And here's the thing. If someone is still alive, you can still resolve conflict or come to resolution. When someone passed away, this option is gone. So that is why we have funerals. And look at this. The mourning and grieving is part of you processing individuals pass away. There are cultures where they don't cry at all when someone passes away. They party. And now you may think, what? Someone passed away, and you guys are having a party because he passed away? What kind of sadistic crap is this? Now, let me explain to you. I'm an anthropologist, remember? So I will explain to you what the difference between this. In the Western world, which has based itself on the ancient Greeks and ancient Romans, there's an emphasis on strength. And when you pass away, your strength is gone. So there's an emphasis on loss. So that's why being sad at funerals is the norm. In other cultures, it's the security of the crowd that's important. Now, for example, because this is their thinking, when you're born as a little baby, you're new into the world. You have to be raised, you have to be shaped, you have to get a name, you'll be influenced, and then later when you're in your teenage years, you will develop your own character slowly, and then you're an adult. As an adult, you have an impact on the community. Now, depending on where you grow up and who raised you, determines how you end up in life, how you turn out, and how you turn out will affect other people. When you are born, they don't know whether you will end up as righteous or you will end up as a reprobate. They don't know. They don't know what type of impact you will have on them, whether good or bad. But when you've passed away, it's over. You've been around. So they close the chapter of your earthly life by celebrating that you were alive. And that's how they process it. They process it in a form of festivity. They process it in a type of a party. You've lived. You've been around us. And then the community can move forward. Now, in both cases, where the people have this sad ritual called a funeral, or they have this happy ritual as a form of a funeral also, for example, some Asian communities, it both comes down to the following. People want to conceal information about the deceased. They want to conceal, as far as possible, information about the one that passed away. Now, the one that passed away is unaffected by whatever's out there about them. If he had multiple affairs and if he was unfaithful to his wife, if that comes out after he passes away, it can't harm him or affect him anymore because he's gone. If it comes out that he was backstabbing people, or if any scandal comes out, it will be those that are still alive that may be affected by it, but not the one that passed away. So, the reason why people want to control information about those who passed away is to maintain ease amongst the living. When this does not work well, when the funeral ritual does what it's designed to do, namely to provide ease for those that are left behind, those are still alive, it can lead to further conflict. Sometimes it happens that at funerals, fights break out. And sometimes afterwards, it will lead to other homicide also. And by the way, Amanda, this is not about you. Okay, about what you feel or whatever. This is about what happens in the world and why they do things the way they do. We are still in the world till Christ comes back, so we need to understand what the world is doing, even though we're not active participants in it. If you get your best to resolve conflict, but others persist in pride because they don't want to they don't want to find a resolution, then that's not on you. Their anger, they're the ones who will carry it, not you. You did your part by repenting and wanting to resolve things with them. So that's why it's always important to forgive and to process things. Because a lot of us went through a lot of unnecessary difficulty due to past conflicts of those who went before us. Past conflicts of your ancestors can affect you. Now, of course, now that you're alive, you have influence too upon your circumstances, but still, you can be set up by conflicts of the past. If you're ignorant about it. And that's why it's very important for parents and grandparents, as well as older relatives, to share information about the past. For example, if you had a great grandfather who was a drunken man often, alcoholic, often being beaten around by the people in the village, if that was him, then you need to know about it. Now we think, why should I know about it? I never knew my great grandfather. The man passed away, let him rest in peace. Hold on. If you see that your great grandfather had this pattern of being victimized, now look at your grandfather, then his son. You may notice that your grandfather was the one doing the victimizing because he didn't want to end up like his father. And now you see that your dad, who is the grandson of your great grandfather, that he has this pattern of being victimized. And you hear that you witness how your father was often falsely accused and all that. And now you notice that in your life, you either are developing the defense mechanism of your grandfather, that means fighting people before they fight you, or you realize that people tend to feel comfortable victimizing you too. So, knowing about your ancestors till about your near ancestors. I'm not talking about people hundreds of years ago, but just knowing about your ancestors, like your great grandparents or great great grandparents, is relevant. So it's a responsibility of the living to hand over knowledge to the youth. If you never knew anything, if you never knew anything about your ancestors, because your parents kept things quiet to protect the image of those who passed away, they did you a disservice. Why? Because when the effects of the lives you've lived begin to affect you, you think it's something new. You will misdiagnose the situation. And by misdiagnosing the situation, you'll end up going in cycles, resolving something without ever realizing where the root is. Knowing about your ancestors can contribute to you healing and processing things faster. Now, if information is not available, you can still heal and prosper, absolutely, but it will benefit you if you know. And that's why this whole concept of post-mortem privacy, or this whole concept that we have to protect someone's reputation after they pass away, it can be quite harmful. Look, I'm not saying that we have to slander people after they pass away. No, why would you do that? But if the individual was not particularly righteous, we have to admit that. We need to admit both the good and the bad about the individual after they pass away, so that we can process who they were and how they affected our history. Because how they affect our history is what we experience today. So if the individual who went before you led a horrible life with negativity, that surely affected the community. Even though the individual passed away 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, the horrible life they've lived is echoing now in the present. So if people who have processed how the individual was, they are now able to deal with the consequences that's left for them. Because all of us are dealing with the consequences of our ancestors. The name of your country comes from your ancestors. The language you speak comes from your ancestors. The dialect you speak also. Many of your mannerisms and your preferences in life were transferred onto you by your culture. that was maintained by your ancestors. So your ancestors, how they operated in life, the consequences is what you grew up in. So it's important to know who were they. And that's why it's not a good idea to put the responsibility for historical narratives on public schools. Public schools are funded by the government to prepare their citizens for the 9 to 5, for the corporate world. That's it. And they gave them some history to train people to have allegiance to the flag of the country, but that's it. You should never delegate the responsibility of teaching history to public schools. Never. Every community must have their own elders and their leaders who transfer knowledge of the past to the youth. Since the early 20th century, all over the world, this tendency was developed to rely on the public schools to tell us about who we are, where we came from, about the past conflicts. And what happened then was that the governments, they hid a lot of dirt that they didn't want us to know about, because if we would find out about the dirt, we would realize we need to process this and move further. So the governments preserved many of the past conflicts and they recycled them. How? By withholding information from us. That is what has happened way too often. So, we as believers, we as saints, we do not even endorse this concept of post-mortem privacy. We don't endorse it. Why not? Because by endorsing such concepts, you withhold the opportunity for the youth to be better off. Oh, Rashid, what if you were adopted? Okay, if you're adopted, you weren't raised by your ancestors, but energetically, your ancestors still have a grip on you. If you are adopted, you both have the energetic consequence of your ancestors as well as the ancestral consequences of those that adopted you. So now you have a double package. Now you have double things to process. In any case, processing needs to happen. So that is something every historian will tell you, that social relationships don't change that quickly. For example, in Asia, you still have this cyclical thinking that the ancient Greeks put there through the Han Dynasty. The Han Dynasty was an Apollonian administration that the ancient Chinese kings established. So the Han Dynasty, which was the beginning of China, shaped Asia in such a way that the cyclical thinking that the Greeks brought there became native to Asia. Until this day, you have the cyclical thinking in Asian cultures. Why? Because people rarely change. People want things to be the same. They want things to be predictable. For example, in the West, particularly in English-speaking nations, you have this tendency to appease the anger of the crowd. That's why you have common law in the Anglophone nations, with the nations with English as a first language, including the United States. Why? Common law is based on the Greek theater. You appease the masses. Why is it that the United States, even though it's separated from the British Empire a long time ago, why is it they still have common law? Because the public holds on to what's familiar to them. So social change happens slowly in human history. Now, change for the better can happen, but for improvements to happen collectively, often is preceded by a lot of fights and bloodshed, because most people will resist improvement. That's the sad condition of the human species, but that's how it goes. And that's why it's important to not only know about history, but also to process it. So that's why, look, if you want to remove statues of enslavers like Christopher Columbus, I agree with that. You should not honor such reprobates. We're putting statues for them out there. Just like in Europe, you're not going to see Nazi statues in France or in places that were occupied by the Nazis. The same way, you should not put statues out there of reprobates who passed away and who caused a lot of collective harm. But at the same time, you should not pretend like those things never happened, because then you are withholding proper knowledge from the youth. And by withholding proper knowledge, you give the false impression that things used to be great in the past. So that is one that's one critique I have on this whole cancel culture. Look, I grew up also listening to hip hop and rap music. Okay, Tupac, Biggie, Snoop Dogg, Eminem, Dr. Dre, Ja Rule, Nelly, later also, you name it, man. I grew up listening to those artists. Now, about this white rapper that they call Eminem, some of his lyrics are very, very graphic, to say the least. There are people today who were born after the year 2000, and they're listening to those lyrics and they think, whoa, what type of graphic nonsense is this? And now you have people born after the year 2000 that want to cancel those songs. And older people like me are thinking, what? You want to cancel this song of Eminem? Oh, you haven't hit the other songs he's made. So, historically speaking, the public, while I was growing up, was more tolerant to the graphic songs that Eminem was making. But now you have the generation afterwards that's horrified by it. Should we now delete those graphic songs of Eminem out of history? First of all, we cannot. Those things happen. But should we censor all of Eminem's graphic songs? No. We can decide we're not going to play them on radio that much anymore, but we have to leave those things accessible to the public, so the public knows, listen, at the end of the 1990s and early 2000s, this is the type of music that the public listened to. If you're offended by it, then find out what's wrong with those people and make sure you're better than they are. You understand me? So, rewriting history by omitting unpleasant facts is not going to be beneficial. That does not mean that we cannot rectify the past. Listen, I know for sure, if you would go to Korea and there would be statues of Japanese emperors, the Koreans would knock it down, saying, hey, Japanese occupied us, they did a lot of harmful stuff to us. Why do you put a statue here of the people that colonized us? You go to China, especially in China, don't even dare to put a Japanese shrine over there to honor their heroes from the Second World War, because Chinese will turn on you. Even the police will turn on you. Okay? So we should rectify stuff in public when we can. But at the same time, we must be firm. Human history is not a bed of roses. Human history has not been moonshine and drinking liquor all the time. It's by recognizing the errors as well as the stupidity of those that went before us that we are able to process the present and be delivered from ancestral curses. When you give someone a pleasant view of a past that never happened, they will live in a security that's based on a hoax. And a security based on a hoax is like a bubble that will burst sooner or later. And when the bubble bursts, it's going to be far worse off. It's much better for them to learn the real history and to learn that they should be better than for you to give them a false sense of security that's based on a past that never happened. So now you understand why I both acknowledge as well as critique this cancel culture thing that's going on. All right? So, do you understand now why it's detrimental to rewrite history, whether it's national history or a family history? Please let me know in the live chat. I'll give you a minute to answer. For example, some people say, hey, my parents beat me when I was a kid and I turned out well. Okay, how well did you turn out? You turned out not realizing that being drained from 9 to 5 is actually you being exploited. That's how you turned out. You turned out pleasing the public at your own expense. That's how you turned out. For example, in the Black community, especially amongst Afro-Americans, not only Afro-Americans, but there is this tendency to boast about beating your children just to teach them respect. And a lot of Blacks say, hey, I was beaten, my cousins were beaten, even my own parents were beaten by my grandparents, and they ended up well. Yes, you end up so well that it's going so downwards from the Black community in the United States. Look at the killings in Chicago. Look at the cooning that's going on. Look at the fact that you're still not well organized and unified against police brutality against you. Yet, you guys claim, oh, we were beaten, but we ended up well. We ended up so well that your community is now under attack and you guys can't unify and come together and do something about it. Yet you all ended up well. So no, you did not end up well. You didn't. You survived and you're coping, but you did not end up well. And that's why it's important not to sugarcoat your family's history. Look, you're not going to you're not going to slander your own family history either, but you're not going to sugarcoat it as if everything was heaven. If your parents were beaten as children as a form of quote-unquote discipline, and you realize that your father was often angry or very emotionally distressed, now you know he didn't end up well. So if they did it to you out of ignorance, then you know, okay, I need to go into therapy because I can't continue like this. I mean, if being harsh and violent towards children makes people end well, then how come the world is the way it is? Why are so many young people getting into drugs, binge drinking, or in those activities quite harmful for their own bodies? Because they have been brain damaged by the way they were raised. It's not just physical punishment that can harm children. Emotional violence also. But Rashid, I ended up well because I show respect to people. Okay, but are you holding the community accountable for when they neglect you? No, because people have free will. They can choose whatever they want. So you were raised and you ended up so well that you are okay with the community neglecting you, while you have to make sure everyone's at ease? Are you kidding me? No, you did not end up well. Stop it. Just because you're not addicted to drugs and wandering the streets, or just because you're not in prison, doesn't mean you ended up well. You ended up as a pleasant and polite victim. That's how you ended up. You did not end up well. Absolutely not. Me, I address things. So when people come and say that they ended up well and they can complain about the youth, I'm going to question them. I'm going to interrogate about how they were raised and how the people around them were raised. And if they begin to make excuses, tell them, listen, the reason why your community is so messed up because you guys were all messed up when you were children by wrong parenting. I don't care that you're not in prison. I don't care that you have a job for 9 to 5 and you don't have a criminal record. You did not end up well. Or else all of you would have stopped that crazy government from going so far. So, post-mortem privacy is not beneficial to us. We need to know what was, because what was is affecting what is now. And for us to do properly what is now, we need to process what was. And we can't process what was if people keep rewriting history just to please people in the present. Look, you don't have to get high by the scandals of the past. You don't have to indulge in past wrongdoings, no, but you have to process them. You can still hold good memories about people around you that passed away without sugarcoating how they really were. It's possible. So, do not endorse nor participate in this rewriting of history just to appease the resentment of the present. Look, if people are hiding accomplishments of your ancestors, due to racial policies, you should be upset with that. Okay? But also admit that your accomplishments were concealed often because people did not want you guys to be well off. If your community exists today because your ancestors survived genocide, then you need to admit this. So it has nothing to do with left-wing or right-wing politics. It has to do with dealing with things in the present. If you want things to change for the better, you need to process the past. It's how simple it is. So, do not indulge in this post-mortem privacy thing. Look, I'm not saying that if someone passed away, you should indulge in slandering them or conducting smear campaigns about them. No, why would you do that? But also do not go and pretend that they were saints and angelic human beings that were on the earth. No, don't do that either. And in any case, what's most important is that you agree with Christ, you walk by faith, and that's how the past will not have a grip on you anymore. By the way, Andrew, don't forget to download WhatsApp. All right? For now, thanks for listening. Keep on agreeing with Christ. Be at peace, and I'll see you next time.